Welcome to Pastors Unplugged, the podcast of the pastors of Pastors Lloyd and Ryan. I'm Pastor Ryan.
And of course, I'm Pastor Lloyd.
And we're back. Here we are. We're doing another podcast, and we are live in person.
I think so.
For anyone who's COVID conscious, and of course we are as well, we are both doubly vaccinated, 2 weeks ago. So COVID safety protocols are being observed here. But it's been a few weeks. You've been very busy. We've both been very busy, but now we're back again. And I want to just get into it, unless there's anything that you wanted to say to open in terms of reflections of the past few weeks. Anything that kind of has bubbled up as far as follow-up from previous podcasts?
No, other than I'm really thankful to God that in actual fact here we are, like two people sitting in a room without masks, in person, communicating with one another in a normal way, except we got microphones stuck in front of our mouth.
Yeah. We are keenly aware that it's not just you and I in the room. They're watching.
Right.
But no, I'm thankful for that too, just because, this whole pandemic has been so crazy. Even just this here is just kind of a reminder of the hope that we're finding, even amidst, all the Delta variants and so on and so forth. It's nice to have this little oasis of conversation.
For sure.
So with that, I also, I guess, will say that I was watching back on the last podcast, and I tend to watch these after the fact, and we were talking earlier that I wanted to bring up a question that came out of our last podcast. So what's funny, though, and we'll tell the listeners that I tried to start a conversation on this, and Pastor Lloyd said, no, save it for the podcast. So we actually haven't. So this will be we know the question. We both know the questions that's going to be asked, but this is going to be kind of our raw reaction to it because that's the way Pastor Lloyd wanted it. So here's my preface for the question, and I think this will be a neat discussion for you and I to have. I was listening back to the podcast, and I think one of the prevalent themes of our last episode about belonging was really becoming the kind of church that really can welcome people of a variety of backgrounds. We talked about all sorts of different demographics, people that feel disenfranchised by our culture, disenfranchised by life, and there is this very compelling vision of the church to be a place where people feel safe, where people feel like anyone can come, that you can be yourself, that you are accepted just as you are. So we painted this picture of a church that welcomes people through this kind of city on a hill nature where we're known as this place in the community, like that's the place where I can belong. And for as compelling as that vision was, it got me thinking, like these are the very kinds of things that have in the past led me and a lot of other folks to what we might describe as a very attractional style of ministry. And branching off of that, you can have, say, the seeker-sensitive movement, the emergent church movement. And not to say any of these were wrong per se, but for me, and this would be very neat to get both of our perspectives on this. For me, I have recently come to sort of not to say that we would need to do away with the attractional elements, because kids camps are great. Ways to invite the community are great. But I think I have noticed in myself a certain tendency to favor that sort of belonging side to the expense of, I guess I would say, the authentic side. And that's what I guess we'll talk about. And so the question that I pose here is Jesus alone enough to attract people to the church? Like, in other words, do we need to go hard and heavy on the belonging, on the welcoming, on the accepting? Is it not do we have to sort of bait them in on other ways and maybe expect that they'll get Jesus later? Or is this person of Jesus, the fact that they can come here and discover who Jesus is that enough to attract people to church? So I've got my thoughts. You've got your thoughts. Do you want to? You said you were dying to munch on this question, so I'll give you the first shot.
My first shot is I'm not entirely sure what the question means.
Sure.
Because it depends on who's asking the question, and it depends on who's answering the question. But my first reaction is, well, now there's a churchy question. Like, doesn't that come right out of the quotes, the church, and really more specifically right out of the mouth of the evangelical church?
Sure.
Right? Because I mean, you and I have grown up in a tradition where, I don't know whether you've ever heard this phrase, but I've heard it more times than enough. You'll never know that Jesus is all that you need until he is all that you have. Have you ever heard that? Or variations?
I have heard that, yeah, several times. Yeah. And, you know, there's I would say there's an element of truth, but I think I know where you're coming from, and I would agree with you. There can be a certain, call it coercive, not like a certain element that doesn't validate the real experience that someone is facing in the moment. I don't know if that's where you're going with this.
No, where I'm going is it just absolutely begs the question, what does it mean to have Jesus?
Precisely.
What in the world does that mean? And what does that mean to a common Joe on the street? Yeah. You know, or, you know, Susie Q, who's waiting on your table at Montana's, which is where I had lunch today.
Yeah, and I think by even my phrasing of the question, like, yeah, it rings of the kinds of arguments that say, well, I should just be able to put Jesus is here on the sign, and then people should just simply become flooding. And there's also sort of a risk of a dismissiveness that can come from that as well. It's like, oh, well, you know, we don't need to do anything extra to help, you know, bring people in because we just preach the word here. And so if people aren't coming, well, they know where they're going anyway, kind of thing. Like that's not satisfactory to me either. So,
or what's more specific to that is in the evangelical church, and I kind of want to park there, sure, is they won't say we just preach the word here. What they'll say is we preach the gospel here.
Depending on the church, I guess.
Right. Yeah. But
it's true that
everybody's coming from the biblical precedent. Go ye into all the world,
yeah, and preach the good news.
Right. Yeah. So
and I want to be clear that there's nothing wrong with that. Like, well, yeah, I could even find myself risking saying, and that's kind of where this came from, because I remember I was watching myself make arguments even the last podcast, and I was even pushing back on myself, going like, yeah, there's this really great image of the sort of attractional, like really blessed community that people just want to be a part of. But there is something, it sounded like, even to me, like, I don't know, I almost wanted to kind of push back on myself and go, but we also have to remember that we want people to know Jesus, because it's not just because what I have seen happen is the other end of the spectrum. Because of course we don't want to go on the side of the spectrum that just, it's like, you know, word only and we don't care about your feelings kind of thing. But there's also a side of the spectrum which it's just about community. It's just about the love. It's just about the care we share for one another. And Jesus becomes sort of an optional element of it. So I'm trying to find a third way, like a third authentic way that isn't this kind of pendulum swing to either we're just this worm-loving community where Jesus is optional, or you got to just preach the word and not do anything to kind of help bring people along.
Yeah. A couple of comments about what you just said.
Sure.
I'm really hoping that with what I had to say about considering how a person belongs to a community, it didn't come across as me saying that the community that the focus needs to be at 100% an attractional community. Because I hope that's not what I said. Certainly not what I intended to say. Because I absolutely don't believe that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that that's what people really mean when they say belong. I thought the word that came up more times than enough was this concept of authenticity. That there is in relationships established, and the key word there was relationship, in the community was this whole capacity for one to receive authenticity and to be authentic. Mm-hmm. And I don't see that as being incompatible with where we may be going in this particular conversation.
Oh, absolutely. I don't see it as incompatible either, which is why I just kind of want to bring it up because, we've said at the beginning of this podcast, we're just having conversation. This is not official statements, but yet even while I listened to myself, I wanted to even just for my own, just to work out even my own mind, like how does that belonging piece intersect with, let's call it just for simple terms, like say evangelism, when we're inviting, when we think about that moment where we invite someone to church, like what is the thing that we are kind of selling, to say it in a very kind of weird way.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Like when we're inviting to church, like is it because when we're having that moment and as people themselves, maybe they have in their minds like this person that has been on their heart that they've been praying for, and maybe they finally come to the courage to invite them to a thing. Like, what is it that is the invite? Is it to come be with this awesome community who's very loving and so on and so forth, or come because this Jesus person is someone who's worth getting to know? Because and here's, I guess, where one of the pieces that there's a lot of different elements for this in me. I think so often and I would include myself in this because I'm not the best evangelist, even as the pastor. And I don't think it's about even being a competition about being the best evangelist. All I'm saying is that I think I have relied too much on the program being the thing that communicates the gospel rather than myself. And again, unless I'm misunderstood, I'm not sure going for an either or either. I'm not saying it has to only be personal evangelism and not the program or either or. I think it has to be a both and. I think we haven't done ourselves a good service as a church to kind of really do both, to explore what it means to talk about Jesus personally, and then I have both in my mind the awesome vision of a person who's down and out, who you can welcome into our community, can experience the love and embrace of community first and experience Jesus through that. I also have in my mind being able to communicate to someone through a backyard barbecue with the neighborhood, authentically. And we're not talking about standing up on a soapbox and preaching. I'm talking about through a relationship, having conversation about this person named Jesus, talking about him as if I would talk about my favorite ice cream stand and say, here's a person you should get to know, and have them have that curiosity. And maybe over the course of a long time, have them get to know about Jesus through me. And then maybe, hey, you want to learn more about this person named Jesus? Come to a small group, come to a worship service, come worship this person along with me.
So let's take that analogy then, and let's kind of flesh it out. And so you meet me, and I don't know anything about church, and we start developing a conversation, and all of a sudden I learn that you're a community pastor at the church. And then you start talking about, have you ever thought about going to church? It's a place where you might meet this person who means a whole lot to me, Jesus. And I could say, well, great, introduce me.
Well, and precisely, and I'd like to think that...
Expecting that you're going to introduce me to a person.
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about
What does that mean?
Well, it's not I'm sure you would agree. It's not like a singular. It's not a script. It's not a verse in the Bible. It's.
No, I'm not even going there. Like if you take it totally, like we live in a culture that is totally unchurched now. I want you to meet Jesus. Oh, Jesus. Oh, is this a Muslim friend of yours? Lots of people know who Jesus is, but what in actual fact do you mean when you say, I want you to meet this person, Jesus? What are we, like, that's so full of what I like to call Christianese.
Oh, 100%.
So what are you saying?
Well, to be clear, what I'm not saying is that we need to use the same phrase. I'm using very general language to kind of describe a kind of thing.
But that's, I think,
Rather,
sort of when we think about this question that we've written out for each other so we don't forget it, is Jesus alone enough to attract people to the church? What kind of question is that? Like, how does that question make any sense?
well, because so I don't, my mind doesn't go to this kind of made up scenario where I'm being forced in a single conversation to meet someone the very first time and then just say, oh, hey, have you met Jesus kind of thing. I think that's a cliche that we often paint and actually turns us away from evangelism because it sounds so artificial.
That's my point.
And that's my point as well. And
Yes.
I'm not advocating for having people artificially come with a script and say, hey, have you met Jesus? Have you met Jesus? Have you going to people's doors? Have you met our Lord and Savior kind of thing? Like, that's not what I'm advocating.
But that is so ingrained in, when we talk about the church, let's be specific, we're talking about church, big C.
Yeah.
We're not talking about Queensway necessarily. But in terms of Christians, evangelical Christians, the phrase, we want people to meet Jesus, is like, of course we know what that means. And we all know what that means. So because we all know what that means, and it's part of our culture, like somebody else will get it in a big hurry because we behave like Jesus. And when somebody comes to our church and learns how loving and caring we are to one another, they will meet Jesus. And my question is it true? Not that we're loving or caring, is walking through the doors of a church and entering into a community. How does this amazing thing happen where this person potentially is going to, quotes, meet the Son of God?
Well, I'm sure you would agree it's not a formula. So I can't tell you this is exactly what they would do in order to do it. I think Jesus is met, like I could talk to you and you could interview me, like we in fact we both met Jesus ourselves in very different ways. So to prescribe one particular way to do it. So I'm not saying we need to start coming up with a system that like this is how people meet Jesus or this is the thing you have to say in order to get them to meet Jesus. But for me, it's more just kind of this end of meeting Jesus, the means to which is varied person by person. And I don't think anyone in any Christian would disagree with that. At the end of the day, and whatever metaphor you want to apply, meet Jesus, have a relationship with Jesus, have union with Jesus, be one with Jesus, whatever the metaphor is, that is ultimately the goal. And so, of course, the question is, how do we get there? And that's kind of what I'm talking about, because that's what I was thinking during our last podcast, because it sounded like what we were strongly advocating for was you get people to meet Jesus by first kind of baiting them in. We didn't say that, and it sounds more nefarious, but sort of bringing them in on the community bit, the love bit, the warmth bit, and then hoping that somehow in the variety of programming that we have, that they'll, meet Jesus. And what does that mean? Okay, make a confession or get baptized or all these kinds of things, but that things will progress sort of automatically. And I guess what I'm pushing back on is this feeling that if we just simply welcome them into a church but don't have any sort of intentional effort to kind of bring people along individually, I don't know. I just feel like it. And if I were to say it, I don't want to say it won't work, because obviously God is powerful enough to work through anything. But I think the very thing that God is inviting us to do is to not just simply have this kind of, spray it broadly and hope something sticks. I think we're meant to, like Jesus did, kind of choose individuals and kind of walk alongside them in this discovery of God, rather than invite them to a program and hope that through the generic programming, they somehow build this relationship with God. I don't know. Did anything I just say make any sense?
Absolutely. And Ryan, I've got to tell you, I'm on exactly the same page. Except, and I admit that I'm one of these people that gets a bit tied up in rhetoric.
Yeah.
Right. So the rhetoric of the thing. What happens if we reverse that? What happens if I meet someone and I have zero purposeful focus on drawing them into a relationship with Jesus? What happens if all I want to do is have an authentic relationship with them, and that for them to have, and we're saying the same thing, I think, for them to have an authentic relationship with me, all my foibles, all of my issues, but somehow we get on the same page and we kind of do life together.
Yeah.
And through that process, because the thing that jumps out in my life is that there comes a point, and there was a point where I'm searching after Jesus and I want to meet Jesus. But as I look back on my life, it's not the point where I met Jesus. It's the point where Jesus met me. Mm-hmm. And there's two different things happening there. And wouldn't it be incredible that you just established this wonderful, joyful, authentic relationship with this person and had the opportunity to stand back from it and watch Jesus meet the person?
Yes, and I have testimony of that.
And so do I, in my own life.
In my own life.
Yeah. Because there was a whole lot of time when I thought that I had met Jesus, I had made a commitment. Sure, I was a very, very young child when I did it, but people told me I prayed the prayer, I said the words, and then I went off and lived a life in the pigsty. And yet fully convinced that, hey, I prayed the prayer, I got the insurance policy, I'm going to heaven. But all of a sudden, life started happening around me, and things disintegrated around me, and I got to the point where I was at the end of myself. And at the end of myself, guess what? Christ met me. I had zero to do with it. Zero. At the end of the day, it was like, I look back on that and I go, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And so we put so much stress on we have this heavy responsibility to bring suffering humanity to Jesus. But Jesus at the end of the day said, hey, when people are coming before me, it's all about, did I know them? Right? Depart from me, I never knew you. Right? Well, Lord, I called you Lord, Lord, right? I did all of these things in your name. Hey, I never knew you. So it's an interesting sort of concept.
And I guess I would go back to what I said before is I feel like what I've observed in my own limited experience is that it draws people to one of two extremes. It's the one extreme that says exactly what you're saying. It's not us that meets Jesus, it's Jesus that meets us. So it kind of, what it results in is people kind of say, well, then I don't need to have any sort of intention towards kind of being on God's, kingdom work. Evangelism, we don't need to do that. We don't need to be, we just basically do what we're doing, and then we just kind of fumble. We just simply love people, just simply show people love. The things that people might say are like, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words to misquote St. Francis of Assisi. So there's that one extreme that it takes a very passive approach. And then there's the other extreme that's just like, no, you got to get out there and you got to go door to door and you got to tell people, you got to say, have you met Jesus? And you got to convert people on the spot kind of thing. And again, what I'm seeking for is that third way. Because I don't think... Because, you asked, because that same sort of extremes it plays out in the approach to relationship, just as you said. You asked the question, is it possible for me to just simply have an authentic relationship with someone? And I say, yes, absolutely. But what I've observed is that a lot of times, I even observed this in my own relationships, like even as I'm, like I could seem, there's just something unsettling about if I've had an authentic relationship with someone for years, but that somehow Jesus has never kind of come up. It just seems like, is it more that is it that I'm actually just simply letting Jesus meet this person, or am I just simply parking my Christianity? Am I living a double life? Like, am I missing opportunities? And of course, people will mishear what I'm saying just now, and then say, "Oh, so what you're saying is you've got to start evangelizing to all your friends. You got to get to the place where you can have that conversation with them." I'm neither saying that. And it goes to the other extreme where people think that they have to build relationships in order to be a project. Oh, so I'm building this friendship so I can eventually turn them to Christ, kind of thing, or, missionary dating, as they call it. Oh, I'm going to date this person because I'm going to bring them to the Lord. And of course, you're fooling yourself if you're saying that. But that's a whole nother podcast. But I'm not saying either or. I watched I can put it in the show notes. I watched a very compelling talk by a guy named Tim Mackey. He's actually the Bible Project guy, or one of the Bible Project guys. And he spends like the first 10 minutes of his talk talking about how much he loves this particular taco place in Portland, Oregon. He just loves the tacos. And he invariably will end up at somebody's house in Portland and say, "Gosh, I had just great tacos the other day. Have you heard of this taco place?" And I think for me, he kind of demonstrated that kind of third way, because knowing him, like if you've heard a lot of his stuff, like he's not one of these hard-nosed, like, got to preach the word to everybody kind of people, but he loves Jesus and he loves the story of Jesus. He thinks Jesus is the story, the best story for the world. So he kind of opened the question without like answering it with a formula or anything. He basically asked the question, like, what does it look like for you to actually believe in something so much that it just kind of naturally flows out of you? Well, and there you go. And so,
is that not the pure definition of authenticity?
Well, exactly. And I think, and that's where we're trying to define authenticity, because I think that's what you and I mean when we mean authenticity.
I mean, being authentic. If you're an authentic Christian, you're authentic. Right? If that's part of your DNA, and for every Christian it should be, I mean, we're remade. Right? It isn't even us. It's Christ living in us. So
Amen.
The authentic part of us is Jesus in that sense. So, but there is an immediate focus on that. This is not about manipulating the other person right? To come online, to come on stream, to come through the doors, to make a decision for Christ. It's not about manipulation. It's about pure desire to be engaged with this person on every level possible, and in and as an authentic Christian. And out of that experience, my premise is that Jesus gets to meet this person because you get to meet this person. Mm-hmm. Right? Because I don't think Jesus is expecting us to separate ourselves from him. In the sense that we're not just a sort of a signpost on the street. We're it. He said that, right? You are my church, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so precisely because I agree with you that we don't want to be manipulative about that, because that's often where it comes, and I worry about that. I worry when I hear certain. I've seen like evangelism training videos or seminars and stuff, and a lot of times it comes across as manipulation. And I think there's something very inauthentic about that. It's like, here's the script, here's the thing to say. It doesn't speak very authentically. And I just fear that we look at that and we think that's what and I think you're right. Like when people think evangelism, they get afraid of it because that's what they're thinking. They're thinking of all these strategies and tactics that we as a church have used that feel like manipulation, kind of feel sticky as we do it, but some kind of barrel through the stickiness and just do it anyway. But other kind of authentically go, this feels kind of sticky. I don't want to do that. And so we feel this kind of, I think, this false dichotomy that it's this false either or of it either has to be evangelism or just let it be kind of thing. Like zero intentionality, just love people. And that's what I think there's something that risks manipulation even in that piece as well, because even with the image we were portraying as like last podcast of the idyllic Christian community that just perfectly loves people and so on and so forth, as we bring them to belong into this utopian oasis of humanity. It's like to what end? Like, because there could be a certain manipulative thing about that as well, because I worry that like if we're not authentic about the reason for who we are, that sounds kind of bait and switchy. Like if we just kind of, we're starting to, come to my community, it's really loving, yada, yada. And then we start preaching as we do, like telling people to kind of come to know Jesus and the holiness of Jesus and so on and so forth. I worry that there's going to be this, whoa, I didn't know you were going to be preaching Jesus on me kind of thing. And
rightfully so, because that's not coming from a place of authentic relationship.
And I agree with you.
It's coming from that place that we just talked about, manipulation. Yeah. And speaking of manipulation in the church, that's usually packaged and wrapped up nicely with a little bow on it called duty and responsibility.
Yeah.
So we have this huge guilt trip, and this just sense that this is our duty and this is our responsibility. And this is it? Is that what Jesus meant?
It is, but I hear you when I say that oftentimes we can take something that is sort of maybe it's not a duty, because, it's Jesus that does this stuff. It's Jesus that takes the lead. It's Jesus that is on mission. So, like, do we have a duty or responsibility to this, or there is a fine line between, like, I think back to when we were preaching through, say, Matthew chapter 10.
We don't have a duty or a responsibility to do this. I don't believe that. I think, yes, we have a duty and a responsibility, and we've been told to, and we must do, or we are being inauthentic Christians. We have a duty to love them, to literally care for them, to care desperately for them. And out of that purity comes magnificent things. Like, people have spoken into my life because they desperately cared for me, and they really, really were concerned that I was just going to flush myself away. Mm-hmm. And they were right? And they never gave up on me through caring. And so many of them never once mentioned, come back to the church, or never said that. They just said, Lloyd, never forget that my door is open to you. Never forget that I desperately want to hang out with you, that I want to be with you, and I remembered all of those things when I was like the disenfranchised son that was looking after the swine and decided that he was going to go back to his father's house and become a servant there.
Yeah.
What did his father do? Hey, come on home. Let's have a party.
Like, I hear you, because if you got the sense that these people had some sort of like catch associated with their love, like that would have just negated it. It's like, you're doing this in order to get me to...
Yeah, like, put your cigarettes away, Lloyd. Like, don't smoke when you come to them. Like, or don't do this, or don't do that, or, like, don't live that way, and I can have a relationship with you. Or don't be who you are right now. See, the thing about welcoming people, and you said that earlier in our little podcast today, welcoming people into the church, no matter where they are in life, no matter what they are, the point of bringing them into community is, and this is also true, so this is one of those kind of yin and yang things.
Yeah.
Come on into the church. We love you as we are. We care for you as you are. We want you to meet Jesus. We want Jesus to meet you. You can't stay that way. You can't stay that way.
Stay like
who you are.
Yeah.
You've got to change.
It sounds like you're saying something which has often been quipped, like, Jesus loves you. I forget how it's phrased. It's like, Jesus loves you too much to let you stay the way you are, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's a bit of Christianese. But what I'm saying is that being in community in Jesus's church means that you are a certain way.
Yeah.
Right? You're still authentically you.
Yeah.
But you're you, and this is I'm talking about a person that has met Jesus, and Jesus has met them, and something has happened through the power of the Holy Spirit, and now they're on the path.
Yeah.
And the path means the same as it means for all of us. We're still walking the path. Some are a little farther along than others, but none of us have gotten there. But the point is, things have changed. They're on the path.
Yeah. So I think this is probably even its own podcast, and so maybe we kind of package this all and kind of like we'll talk, because that question of what does it mean to meet Jesus or for Jesus to meet us, that's a big question. I think that's a huge question that is a little bit straying from what I wrote down, Lloyd, which is because it's not all that far away. The question again is Jesus alone enough to attract people to a church? I guess, and I'm not trying to manipulate it to my own agenda because I wrote the question. I just simply asked the question because I asked the question as a reaction to a sort of a bait and switch, even manipulative sort of approach to bringing people into the church. I'm reacting to sort of what would perhaps be a misunderstanding of what we were saying last week, because it sounds like we both had this authentic relationship with Jesus at the center of it always, but this misunderstanding that our responsibility is to kind of entertain people, to let people feel just simply that love and compassion, and that we somehow need to leave Jesus at the door, or leave Jesus, or lighten the Jesus load as we enter people into the space, which is its own loaded question, because I know that the question could be then asked of me, well, what do you mean by lighten the Jesus load? Like, is everything we do as a church, does there have to be like a sermon? Does there have to be an altar call at everything we do? So what do you mean by lighten the Jesus load? And I guess, I don't know. I don't even know what I'm asking. I'm just asking the question. I guess what I'm truly asking is like, where does the introduction to Jesus begin? Does it begin after you come into the door, or does it come before you come in the door, or can it be both? I guess that's kind of the question I'm asking. Is there maybe not a duty on us? Is there an opportunity available to us to explore what it means to be the bringers of Jesus outside of the programs, to be the ones ourselves to kind of communicate who Jesus is to people authentically and not manipulatively? I guess that's the question I'm asking.
I'm not sure I can answer the question, because it kind of begs another question. And that is, when we talk, like when we are in relationship with people, and you and I are leaders within a church. So in our sense, a Christian community is kind of defined as church.
Sure.
But we have lives outside of our responsibilities as leaders of the church.
Sure.
And that still puts us in community.
Yeah.
And so bear with me, because I think it begs the question, is Christian community identical with church?
Well, again, this is all depending on how you define it, because ideally, Christians will congregate into churches. But we all know that that's so loaded nowadays because churches nowadays are their own thing. Like, it doesn't even require any amount of, it's just a building. You could have the Church of Scientology, you know? It's like, there's no requirement for the church to look anything like an authentic community of Christians. It's become this own thing, which I don't think is the most authentic, but it's what we're contending with in our current day and age.
Yeah. When we were considering this question, and all we did was know what the question was going to be, I went to my Bible, and I tried to really quickly discover what Jesus had to say about the church, per se. Because in actual fact, if we're introducing people to the church, what did Jesus mean by church? And he really only used a phrase that could be interpreted as church in the original languages twice. And one was in Matthew 16 when he was talking to Peter. And he says, on you, I will build my, quotes, church. Yeah. But then I discovered that word, church, can authentically be interpreted as meaning community.
Yeah, well,
on you, I will build my community.
Yeah, well, the word church is ecclesia, which, of course, at that time, as far as my seminary education was concerned, it could have been described as it could be used for just a general assembly of people. So the word itself was not itself establishing this sort of exclusively Christian thing. It was just a group of Christians that were authentically living out this faith, and then it became its own thing.
Yeah, an assembly of people is a community.
An assembly, a community. Well, no, I'm agreeing with you.
Right. Yeah. So all of a sudden, the church becomes, in so many respects, historically and otherwise, culturally defined. So when we talk about And sorry, let me just be specific with the question. Is
we got to really stay on
Jesus alone enough to attract people to the church? So that begs.
Don't get too stuck on the question.
What culturally defined entity are we really talking about when we say the word church? Or can we not just say his community? And if it's his community, what did he mean by the word? And the only place that he really sort of fleshed that out was his prayer about the community in John 17. And all he said about that was, where they are one, as you and I, praying to God, as he and his Father God were one.
Yeah.
The community into which people were inviting people needs to be a unified community.
Yeah. And I think you're making actually my point. I think we have so made the church into its own thing, and and oftentimes we've associated the church with its programming as well. So I feel like when we think about how we invite people to get to know Jesus, I think there is this sort of assumption out there, or there's this general attitude that we got to rely on the program to bring people to Jesus, that I need to bring them to this thing, get them in. It's the kind of thing where, hopefully I don't make anybody mad here, but it's like the thing where, the parent sends the kid to youth group or to children's ministry and hopes that it will serve as some sort of like spiritual laundry machine.
Yeah, exactly.
As long as I can get them to the church. So so we've really doubled down on this a lot in, say, youth ministry circles. And I'm not saying that there's something wrong with having fun events to attract people to the church. There's nothing wrong with that per se, but I've seen this play out so many times, especially in youth ministry circles, where like you try to bring them in on the fun bit. And it can vary whether or not there is sort of this, what am I saying? I'm kind of going off track. So suffice to say, what I think when it comes to the church, we rely so heavily on bringing people to the church. I agree with you. It really is just a community. So what should be attractive to people towards this community is, yes, the way they love one another, but to say that we somehow need to kind of bait and switch the Jesus part out of it, bait people in on the love, but kind of lay low on the Jesus. I ask, then where else will Jesus be known if he's being dismissed from our community, from our authentic community? I hate that we have to think in terms of and so what's been relegated is we have to think like, oh, is this a fellowship event or is this a discipleship event? Is this a fellowship event or is this a evangelism event or is this an outreach event? Like we end up having to categorize these things because, and I get why, because so often we feel that weight of duty. Yeah, that, okay, well, if it's an outreach thing, then I got to put on the Jesus-y kind of exoskeleton and be on. And I think what people crave as a result is just an opportunity to just be. Oh, why don't we just... I have been in small groups where it almost feels like a relief sometimes to just have a time to connect. Because it's like,
Amen.
Can't we just leave the Bible study and just connect?
Amen.
And I just feel like there's something fishy about that. And I don't know how to articulate it. I don't quite know how to articulate it because I don't want to be the guy to say, no, everything in our church community has to have Jesus. I got to preach, got to have a Bible study. Because I like that too. I like just sitting by the pool, enjoying the breeze, hanging out with people. I like that. But what I ask this question of myself, what does it say about me that I can spend an entire week with a bunch of Christians? Like I have gone away with other just Christian friends on just like on a trip, and we might pray over a meal. But I don't know, like I'm not trying to give myself any sort of extra guilt because I feel like I need more guilt in my life. I'm just saying this is why we have to jerry-rig the programming because I feel like we have sort of lulled ourselves into this state where our natural being doesn't, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Am I wrong in thinking that there's something fishy about Christians who get together and that Jesus just doesn't come up naturally? Maybe I might be totally out to lunch on this.
Not necessarily, Ryan. Not necessarily. But getting back to, I'll come back around.
You can go.
To it.
I had my say on it. So
No. I'm going to come back
this.
around to it. But what we're really talking about here is when we say, is Jesus enough? Or when we're communicating with people and we're trying to draw them toward the light, let's put it that way, on whose terms are we doing that? Like whose Jesus do we want them to meet? On what basis do we want them to meet Jesus? On our terms or on the basis of their pure need? And they define their need. They know their need. We don't.
Sure.
Right? All we can say is, if you don't know Jesus, if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, you need to have a relationship. But they as well as we have a myriad of needs, deep needs, right? And they're desperate for us, for some human being out there to know their needs, right? We all are, right? That's part of being human, right? That's part of being in relationship, authentic relationship, right? So what is wrong with, instead of engaging in order to engage, in order to deliver the message and present the Jesus that is our Jesus, what's wrong with holding back a bit and establishing the relationship based on yes, love, but on authentic care, authentic desire to get to know the person, and they feel that, and out of that, and it may take a while, comes the building of relationship, and the key word here, building of trust. And out of trust comes a willingness to hear your gospel.
Yeah.
And your gospel is your personal relationship with Jesus, not the prescribed Roman road and the four spiritual laws, and that on and on and on we go.
Yeah, I think what this is just highlighting, and I don't know if I even felt by even asking this question, I don't know that I would have ended up here, but I think what this really highlights is I feel like there's something about the way that we have defined church community or Christian community. The fact that we have to speak of the two different things, I think that's part of the key. That we have disassociated kind of church community with Christian community. And I think that part of what I would love to see the church broadly and our own church kind of rediscover is what exactly does that mean to be together, which has to do with belonging, which has everything to do with what we were talking last week. So that's maybe the integrating point, which I kind of accidentally stumbled across just now. It's through that belonging and having that authentic relationship with Jesus at the center and doing it together. And again, this is another podcast, but like ridding the individualistic elements out of
Write down that podcast.
Because I think it's been highly individualistic, and we've kind of prescribed this kind of individualistic faith, which causes people to feel like, oh, I've got to figure this out on my own, and then they get lost in it. They don't know how to figure it out on their own. They don't know how to find Jesus on their own. So they say, oh, well, I'm just done with this. Let's just hang out and connect, because that's all we know how to do. I don't know that we're very good at even knowing how to be together. Be Christians together. Be followers of Jesus together. I don't know. I think the individualism in our culture has really stripped out something that I think we would do well to reclaim. But again, I can't, in this moment, articulate exactly what that is. Mm-hmm. And one thing I'll also admit, as I was ranting about my thing earlier, I think what this really just kind of highlights is a deficiency in myself. And again, not that I'm trying to be overly, heaping the guilt on myself. It's just that I think I myself have a lot to learn about being authentically a follower of Jesus myself.
Well, hello.
Well, and that's, of course, where we all are. So I'm not saying I'm any different than anyone else. I'm just saying that this is maybe less, well, if it's a indictment on the church is as much indictment on me myself, because if I'm here blaming the church for not bringing Jesus authentically in it, I think I have to point to myself and say, even I can go away on a vacation by myself and not, pick up a Bible once, because I have that ability. And what does that say about me? So I think I want to be fair to placing this blame on the church. Oh, we're not doing it correctly. But I think this is an invitation for all of us to dig into ourselves, because I feel that for myself, to dig into myself. And that's the journey I've been on and continue to be on, is really kind of rediscovering what Jesus means to me. Because I'll admit, as a pastor, you kind of get tempted into that sort of workhorse kind of mode, where you're kind of, you're succumbed by that kind of duty-oriented messaging, because you've got this thing that you want to have happen, and it verges on the coercive. And so I am indeed asking questions like what does it look like to invite people based on an authentic kind of not baiting people, but inviting people to something awesome. That is both a community of belonging, but a belonging that can be felt with Jesus and also with one another.
And definitely not an either or.
No, and. I say and. With Jesus and with one another.
Yeah, exactly. Because as you were talking about, having some time and some space to consider my personal and, quotes, individual relationship and walk with Christ, absolutely. We're all needing to do that. But we can't, and this is my contention, and this has just come with a gray hair. I don't think it can happen. We consider ourselves as individuals, and it's an individual relationship, but it cannot be parked outside of that Christian community.
Yeah.
Like, we can't see ourselves in relation to Christ without the mirror of community.
And I think that we have talked a good game about community, but I think that the community that we have modeled en masse as the church in general has actually, I think it has been. I think this is what you're arguing, and because I would agree if this is what you're arguing, that we've kind of disassociated that Christian community with Jesus, and it becomes like an either or. We're either in community or we're having my personal relationship to Jesus, but no, it's like this communal relationship with Jesus. Maybe, I don't know, it's weird phrasing.
The authentic community that I'm talking about is being modeled right now between you and I. There you sit, communicating with me, and you're being vulnerable, and you're talking about, how you struggle around some of these ideas. I have exactly the same struggles at times. We're sharing that. We're sharing it for the whole darn world to see, right?
Yeah, because of course this is now a worldwide podcast.
So, I mean, here we are, and it's authentic. Yeah. We don't have an agenda here. We're not trying to somehow manipulate this church into believing one way or believing another way. What we are is just sharing our experiences around our own stories, and at the same time understanding that God has placed us in positions of, quotes, being directive in the church. Like, we have this kind of leadership responsibility and leadership role.
Yeah, it scares me.
Oh, hello. Hello. Yeah. I get up every morning with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, still, it's like, God, you're kidding. Let me go back to bed, please.
But yeah, so anyway, I think we've gone around and around this very good nicely. Is Jesus alone enough to attract people to the church? Well, yes and no. Yes and maybe it's the classic yes and no.
Well, yeah, sure he is. His church.
I guess the way that the way that I would kind of summarize it is to say yes, because indeed it should, to venture with the word should, it should be Jesus at the center of this community that brings the attraction, even the attractional nature of that community anyway.
And the thing we cannot forget, well, a couple of things we can't forget. Jesus himself said, hey, people look at me and I'm just a stumbling block. I'm not an attraction for anybody.
Yeah.
Right? I lived my life, and what happened? They crucified me. This is the story of Jesus. And the other thing is this getting to know Jesus, this thing where Jesus knows us and we know Jesus is 100% supernatural thing. We can't make this happen.
Yeah.
We can't even like I brought this person to the Lord. Really? Like, you've heard that phrase, right?
I've heard that phrase. I might have even used it. Pardon me.
Yeah,
but you're right. Like, you're right to kind of point out the weirdness of that phrase. Yeah.
Like, this is all 100% kind of supernatural activity. Yeah. It's like, I have people in my life whom by the grace of God I had some kind of relationship with, and they would say, yeah, Lloyd, like it's through my conversations with you and the relationship that we built that I was able to find a path or a road to Jesus.
Amen.
And if somebody says that to me, I go, what? Like, really? Really? Me? Like, and I'm a pastor. Like, I'm professionally trained to bring people to Jesus, right? At the end of every function in the church, the pastor's supposed to get up and give the altar call or say a few words, and in that has to be a bit of a gospel message because that's the thing we do as Baptists, right?
Yeah, yeah.
and it's the trained pastor that gets to do that, and I'm not belittling that because. Well, maybe I am belittling.
No, because I think that's what we're getting at is that it's more than just the program, it's more than just the professionals. That there's something about this community, as messy as it is, as strange as it is. It's not just the programs, the professionalism, the lights, the show, the eloquent speaking. It's this strange community that God has ordained but is also kind of working through for fear and trembling to kind of redeem it for his kingdom.
And that's my point. It is, when I say authentic, it's like all of the above. It's the love. It's the tears. It's the grief. It's the sharing. It's the pure, unadulterated joy that we can sometimes feel
rebuke.
Together. And it's the rebuke. Yeah, and boy, I've had that in my life.
Yeah.
I have mentors that have permission to haul me up by the ear, and thank God I've got a wonderfully gracious wife who hauls me up by the ear lots of times and said, "And you call yourself a pastor, and that comes out of your mouth." But you know what I mean? Like that. This is. Like, this is real stuff. Mm-hmm. This is the real stuff of life.
Yeah.
And our Christian community has to be able to be identified that way. Not as that thing with the double doors and the steeple and the cross on it. It's not, that's not it.
Yeah.
We're it. He said that. We're it.
Amen. And with that, I think we're done.